Scientists often tell us that climate change will unfold over many decades. But Edgar Cayce, the man who accurately foresaw the Wall Street disaster and even warned of the last World War, described something far more sudden. He said the map of Europe, the United States, could change in the twinkling of an eye, triggered by a dramatic shift of the Earth's poles. According to Cayce, geography does not fracture randomly. He suggested that the Earth responds to the moral weight carried by nations themselves. The pressure of human greed, he believed, eventually bends the balance of nature. Cayce called this mysterious force national karma. It's March 2026, and nearly 90 years ago, Edgar Cayce spoke about a moment when the world would begin to shift in ways people had long dismissed as impossible. Many believed that around this time, more individuals would start questioning the reality they had always accepted, slowly becoming aware of truths that had remained hidden for generations. What makes this moment especially fascinating is a little-known document recorded in 1934. During one of his deep trance sessions, Cayce didn't simply describe the future the way many expected. Instead, what emerged from the session was written down like a strange kind of medical record, not for a person, but for the Earth itself. And what it revealed completely clashes with the reality we think we live in today. But before we go deeper, and trust me, once we cross the next few minutes, you may never look at reality the same way again. Take a second right now to like this video. Subscribe and share it with someone who you know has been feeling that something is off lately. Because once this starts making sense, you're going to want people around you who understand it too. And if this channel resonates with you, consider becoming a member. And later in the video, you can also support the research with a super thanks and even hype the video using the hype option. Now, stay with me. Let me take you back to the early 1930s. The world was entering a time of uncertainty. Economic collapse had shaken nations, societies were struggling to recover, and beneath the surface many people felt a quiet but growing unease. It was during this period that a man known as the Sleeping Prophet, Edgar Cayce, recorded something unusual. Cayce was not a politician or a scientist. He was a quiet man from Kentucky who became known for entering deep trance states and dictating thousands of readings that were carefully written down by stenographers. These transcripts, later archived by the Association for Research and Enlightenment, covered everything from health remedies to historical mysteries. But among the thousands of readings, one document stood out for a different reason. In Reading 3967, Cayce described what he called a kind of collective condition affecting humanity. It was not a virus, not a disease doctors could diagnose, but something deeper. He spoke of a growing state of collective unrest, a psychological and spiritual disturbance spreading quietly among populations. According to the notes taken during the trance, Cayce described it almost like a planetary illness, a condition emerging as people began reacting to changes occurring across the Earth itself. The transcript explained that strange environmental shifts, social tensions, and sudden upheavals would begin to appear at the same time. Storms would intensify, the ground itself would seem unsettled, and nations would experience waves of anxiety and instability. But the most striking part of the reading focused on one particular nation. Cayce said the symptoms would be felt especially strongly in the United States. In the transcript, he referred to this phenomenon as a form of national karma. In his view, a nation could accumulate the consequences of its collective actions over generations, just as individuals accumulate personal karma. When that weight reached a certain point, the result would not necessarily appear as punishment, but as a deep internal imbalance. The record describes people feeling restless without fully understanding why. Institutions would be questioned. Social trust would weaken. Many would experience a sense that something fundamental in the world was shifting, even if they could not explain it logically. Cayce suggested that this collective unease would not come from a single event. Instead, it would build gradually as people witnessed unusual patterns unfolding around them. Environmental disturbances, political conflict, and sudden global crises appearing closer together in time. According to the reading, these were the symptoms of the Earth itself passing through a difficult phase, and humanity responding to it emotionally and spiritually. The document did not give a precise date, nor did it claim the process would happen all at once. Instead, the notes describe it as a period of awakening through instability, when societies would be forced to confront deeper questions about their direction, their values, and their relationship with the planet. For Cayce, the condition he described was not simply a warning, it was also a diagnosis. My friend, in just the past few weeks, something has been unfolding across the United States that many people cannot ignore anymore. Not a single event, not one isolated disaster, but a sequence of disturbances that appeared almost one after another. If this message is resonating with you right now, if you feel that something unusual is happening in the world around us, take a moment to support the message so more people can hear it. Not for attention, not for popularity, but because there are millions of people scrolling through their phones every day without realizing how many strange events are happening right in front of them. Now, listen carefully to what has been happening. First, the Northeast was struck by a snowstorm unlike anything recorded in modern history. In New York, entire neighborhoods were buried under layers of snow that arrived faster than crews could clear the roads. Cars disappeared beneath white drifts. Airports shut down. Streets that are normally alive with traffic turned silent as the storm overwhelmed the city. Meteorologists struggled to describe the scale of it, calling it one of the most intense winter events the region had ever faced. At nearly the same time, on the opposite side of the country, California was experiencing the complete opposite extreme. Massive storms brought relentless rain that poured into rivers and reservoirs already under pressure. Entire towns faced rising waters as flood warnings spread across the state. Highways closed. Communities watched as water crept closer to homes and farmland. For many residents, the flooding came on top of an already difficult period marked by rising living costs, housing struggles, and economic pressure. What unsettled people was not just the disasters themselves, but the timing. Severe winter conditions in one region, historic flooding in another, both dominating headlines at the same moment. And then, as if the sky itself added another layer to the story, a blood moon appeared over the country. Late at night, people across the United States looked up and saw the moon slowly turn a deep red color during a lunar eclipse. From rural towns to major cities, the cameras captured the same eerie sight glowing above the clouds. Social media filled with images from different states showing the same crimson moon hanging over the horizon. Some people saw it simply as a beautiful astronomical event. Others said the timing felt strange, appearing during a period when the nation was already watching storms, floods, and disruptions unfold. Meteorologists, astronomers, and scientists each gave their explanations. Storm systems follow patterns. Flooding can be traced to atmospheric rivers. A blood moon is a natural result of the Earth's shadow crossing the moon. But for many observers, the real question was not whether each event had a scientific explanation. The question was why so many powerful events seemed to be appearing at the same time. Snow burying the largest city in the country, floodwaters spreading across the west, and a red moon visible from coast to coast. For some people, these were simply extreme weather patterns. For others, they felt like signs that the world itself was entering a turbulent season. And here is where the revelation becomes even more remarkable. When researchers went back and studied the trance readings of Edgar Cayce, they noticed something unusual about the way he described certain moments in history. In several of his documented readings, Cayce suggested that humanity would occasionally pass through brief but intense periods of spiritual pressure, moments when the emotional and psychological atmosphere of entire societies could suddenly shift. He did not describe these moments as lasting for years. He described them as short windows of heightened awareness, brief periods when people across different places would suddenly feel unsettled, awakened, or deeply reflective about the state of the world. According to some interpreters of his work, these moments could last only minutes, hours, or days, but they would leave a lasting impression on those who experienced them. People would sense that something larger than politics, economics, or ordinary events was moving beneath the surface of world affairs. But Cayce's writings did not focus on one single city or location. Instead, his readings often pointed to the United States and the wider world as the stage where these shifts would unfold. He suggested that the Earth itself would begin showing signs: environmental disturbances, a social upheaval, and strange patterns appearing across different nations at the same time. These would not necessarily be supernatural events in the traditional sense. Rather, they would be signals of a deeper transformation, a kind of global reckoning that he sometimes described through the concept of national karma. And when people began to look for parallels in Scripture, many found passages in the final book of the Bible that describe similar moments of worldwide upheaval. In the book of Revelation it is written, "And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood." Revelation 6:12. The text continues by describing a world reacting to these signs in fear and uncertainty. "And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains." Revelation 6:15. Another passage in Revelation speaks of disturbances affecting both the heavens and the earth at the same time. "And there were voices, and thunderings, and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth." Revelation 16:18. For many readers, these verses describe a time when natural events, celestial signs, and global anxiety begin appearing together. Cayce himself did not directly claim that such passages were being fulfilled in any specific moment. But his readings often emphasized that humanity would enter a period when physical events on Earth and spiritual questions in society would begin intersecting more intensely than before. In that sense, the focus was never meant to be one single city like Jerusalem. The focus was the entire world. The United States, Europe, Asia, and the rest of the planet would all experience waves of instability, reflection, and awakening. According to Cayce's interpretation, these moments were not random disruptions. They were part of a larger process in which humanity would be forced to reconsider its direction, its values, and its relationship with the Earth itself. And if his readings are interpreted the way some researchers believe they should be, then these disturbances are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of a transition, a period when the world moves through turbulence before a deeper transformation can take place. And if you are still here right now, then you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Because this is the moment where the narrative recorded in Reading 3,967 stops feeling like a distant historical document and starts sounding disturbingly relevant to the world we are living in today. What Edgar Cayce described was not a single catastrophic day where the sky suddenly tears open and the world ends overnight. His description was far more subtle and in many ways far more unsettling. He spoke about a slow awakening, not a sudden apocalypse. According to the transcript, the first signs would not appear in the sky or in the ground beneath our feet. They would appear in human perception. The shift would begin in the mind long before it became visible in the physical world. People would begin noticing patterns that feel impossible to ignore. Coincidences would start appearing more frequently. You might think about someone, and suddenly they contact you. You begin searching for answers, and the same idea appears repeatedly in completely unrelated places within hours. To some people, this would be dismissed as psychology or confirmation bias, but to others it would feel like something deeper, a signal that reality is more interconnected than we normally perceive. Cayce insisted that this was not magic. He believed human consciousness normally filters out enormous amounts of information every second. Our minds simplify reality so we can function inside it. But during periods of transition, he suggested that this filter begins to weaken. When it does, life can start to feel less random and more coordinated. Events appear connected. Encounters feel meaningful rather than accidental. Many people have already experienced moments like this, brief periods where circumstances seem arranged rather than coincidental. And this is where the message in reading 3967 becomes deeply personal. Cayce said the first true evidence of the shift would not be disasters or global crises. It would be internal discomfort with the old system of living. Careers that once felt secure would suddenly feel meaningless. A lifestyle built around endless competition and consumption would begin to feel exhausting. More and more people would start searching for purpose instead of status. He described a growing number of individuals quietly stepping away from structures they once trusted, not in rebellion, but in realization. And he warned that this phase would be extremely confusing. Some people would interpret these feelings as anxiety, burnout, or emotional instability. Others, strangely, would feel a deep calm, even while the world around them appears chaotic. Two opposite emotional responses to the exact same environment. One group becoming increasingly fearful, another becoming increasingly clear and focused. Cayce described this as a division of interpretation, not a separation of nations, not even a separation of communities, but a separation in how people understand reality itself. Two individuals could live in the same city, watch the same news, and experience the same events, yet emotionally inhabit completely different worlds. He went even further. According to interpretations of his readings, the period between 2024 and 2028 could bring what he described as instability in perception. Time might begin to feel strange. Weeks pass quickly, yet certain days feel unusually long. Memories become blurred. People remember the same event in different ways. Cayce believed this would happen because human awareness itself would be reorganizing. And since the human brain relies on stable patterns to interpret reality, the process could feel disorienting. He warned that during this stage, fear would increase for those resisting the shift, while clarity would grow for those willing to adapt. Not because the events themselves are different, but because the interpretation of those events becomes different. One statement appears repeatedly in discussions of his readings. The event is not outside you, it includes you. And here is something many people overlook. Cayce never encouraged people to panic. He never told them to withdraw from society or escape the world. Instead, his message suggested something very different. According to the perspective recorded in reading 3967, the condition affecting humanity was never described as punishment. It was described as misalignment. In the language often used by Edgar Cayce, the deeper issue was a loss of inner coherence, a gap between what people believe, what they say, and how they actually live. True awakening, in this framework, was not defined by visions or mystical experiences. It was defined by alignment. When thought, word, and action begin to move in the same direction, the inner tension that many people carry begins to dissolve. The mind no longer needs to defend contradictions. But when those three elements drift apart, something else happens. People begin filling the silence with distraction, endless activity, constant stimulation, entertainment, noise, not because these things are evil, but because they prevent a person from noticing the distance between who they are and who they believe they should be. That is why Cayce often pointed to the life of Jesus not as a doctrine to admire, but as a pattern of lived behavior. What mattered was not the idea alone, but the consistency it demonstrated under pressure, showing forgiveness when anger would feel easier, choosing courage when silence would feel safer, practicing compassion when indifference would be simpler. In this interpretation, the teachings were not meant to remain inspirational stories. They were patterns to practice. Cayce once warned that one of the most common mistakes people make is waiting for perfect conditions before living according to what they already understand. They wait for more time, more certainty, more approval, more confidence, but clarity, he suggested, rarely appears before action. More often, it emerges after action begins. A person does not discover purpose first and then act. Purpose becomes visible through repeated constructive choices. This idea also explains why he believed the modern era carries unusual significance. When life is stable and predictable, most personal decisions blend into routine. But during periods of instability, times when societies feel uncertain, small choices gain extraordinary influence. Patience can prevent conflict. Honesty can prevent misunderstanding. Responsibility can prevent harm. Each action seems insignificant by itself. Yet, when multiplied across millions of people, those small decisions quietly reshape the culture around them. Cayce also warned about something far more subtle than hostility or cruelty. He warned about indifference. Cruelty damages the world, but indifference allows that damage to continue. A society rarely collapses only because of wrongdoing. More often, it weakens because good people decide involvement is inconvenient. The awakening he described was therefore not dramatic. It was participation. It meant choosing to care, even when one individual effort seems too small to matter. Take a moment and think about that honestly. If you were to make one small adjustment today that brings your life closer to what you believe is right, what would it be? It does not need to be personal or detailed. Even a single word in the comments can represent that recognition. Acknowledging the possibility of change already shifts something internally. At the end of one of the sessions connected to this discussion, Cayce expressed an idea that later biographers emphasized repeatedly. He suggested that what many people call the Second Coming may not appear as a sudden interruption of history. Instead, it could unfold as a transformation within history itself, a gradual awakening spreading through individuals, first visible in personal behavior, then reflected in communities, eventually shaping entire cultures. For some readers, that idea feels unsettling because it removes distance. Instead of asking when something will happen, the question becomes who will participate. Instead of predicting a distant future, it assigns responsibility in the present. Cayce believed the direction of the world is not determined only by governments, institutions, or powerful leaders. It is influenced by ordinary individuals choosing integrity in ordinary moments. In that sense, the future is not a fixed script. It is more like a field of probability shaped by collective character. Every decision, no matter how small, nudges that probability in one direction or another. And that brings us to you. right here at the end of this video. Out of everything competing for attention today, you stayed through a long reflection about awareness, responsibility, and meaning. Whether you agree with every interpretation or not, something in you was curious enough to keep listening, and curiosity itself matters. It is the mind recognizing possibility. If this conversation made you think, share it with someone who enjoys exploring deeper ideas. Tap the like button so thoughtful discussions can reach more people. Prophecy is being fulfilled at a pace we've never seen before, and I'll be here bringing you every update, every sign, every revelation as it happens. Don't miss what comes next. Subscribe now. Edgar Cayce said in his reading 3967 that after the shifting in geography, there would be 3 waves, 3 movements, 3 shifts that would follow in rapid succession. The first wave, he said, would be a wave of conviction. People who experience the manifestation would be marked. They would be changed. They would go back to their cities, to their churches, to their communities, and they would carry something with them. An urgency, a fire, a desperation for more of God. He said this wave of conviction would spread. It would ripple out from Jerusalem to the nations. People who had been lukewarm would suddenly get serious about their faith. People who had been comfortable in their Christianity would suddenly feel uncomfortable. People who had been playing church would suddenly realize that time is running out. We're already seeing this. Reports are coming in from around the world. People are waking up in the middle of the night with an urgency to pray. Churches that have been dead for years are suddenly experiencing revival. Young people are getting on their knees and crying out to God. Something is shifting in the spiritual realm. The second wave Edgar Cayce prophesied would be a wave of persecution. He said that when the presence of God manifests powerfully, the enemy doesn't sit idle. He said there would be pushback. There would be opposition. There would be those who would try to explain it away, rationalize it, dismiss it, mock it. He said the mainstream media would ignore it. Religious leaders who are comfortable with their traditions would denounce it. Skeptics would come up with natural explanations. And those who truly experienced it would be ridiculed. We're seeing this too. Already this morning, within hours of what happened at 4:07, articles are being published trying to explain it away. Psychological phenomenon, they say. Mass hysteria, group delusion. They'll use any explanation except the obvious one that God showed up. But here's what David Wilkerson said about the persecution. He said it would actually serve God's purposes, because persecution always separates the genuine from the counterfeit. It always divides those who truly want God from those who just want religion. It always reveals who's willing to pay the price. Matthew 5:10-12 gives us Jesus' words about persecution. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. If you're experiencing opposition because of your faith right now, if people are mocking you for believing in biblical prophecy, if you're being ridiculed for watching the signs, take heart. You're in good company. The prophets were persecuted. The apostles were persecuted. Jesus himself was persecuted. And he said, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. But there's a third wave in Edgar Cayce's prophecy, and this is the wave that should make us all pay attention. This is the wave that changes everything. He said the third wave would be a wave of harvest. He said that after the conviction and after the persecution, there would be a great ingathering. He said people who had been hardened against the gospel for years would suddenly have their hearts softened. He said prodigals would come home. He said the lost would be found. He said there would be a harvest unlike anything the church has seen since the book of Acts. And here's what he said would trigger this harvest. He said when believers who experience the manifestation refuse to compromise, refuse to back down, refuse to apologize for encountering God, their boldness would become contagious. Their fire would spread. Their testimony would break through walls that preaching couldn't penetrate. This is what Jesus prophesied in Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Notice what triggers the end. Not just preaching, not just programs, not just religious activity, but testimony. Personal testimony. The gospel being demonstrated, not just explained. People encountering God and then telling others about it with such conviction, such authenticity, such power that it cannot be denied. Hundreds of people who can now testify, I was there, I felt it, I experienced it, I encountered the living God. And according to David Wilkerson's prophecy, these witnesses will be the spark that ignites the final harvest before Jesus returns.
If the end was near, what would it look like? Could it be that the hail was not random weather, but an interruption placed exactly when growth had just begun? Or could it be that the ground itself withdrew its support, opening sinkholes in places once considered safe? While people are still wondering what they mean, animals instinctively avoided the area before any danger was recognized. Objects buried deep beneath desert soil began to surface, and were exposed not by destruction, but by quiet separation. Foundations all seem to be reacting. Besides the constant updates from the media, many Americans' opinion is standing with terrible events, while others' attention shifts to motifs. What do you believe this to be? What if the answer for our big question isn't chaos overnight, but a sequence of signs, unfolding in plain sight, beginning in one nation and echoing across the globe? Before we continue our journey, hit the like and stay with us. It happened in the middle of spring, when winter had already loosened its grip. Trees were budding, fields were turning green. People had packed away coats and begun trusting the season again. Then, without warning, ice began to fall from the sky. There was no dark wall of clouds rolling in, no thunder to signal danger. The air was mild, the light familiar. And then hail struck hard pellets, slamming into roofs, shattering windshields, tearing through early crops, not built to endure cold. Gardens were shredded in minutes. Blossoms that had taken weeks to form were erased in seconds. Spring froze in place. What unsettled people most was the timing. This was not late winter clinging on. It was not a storm drifting out of season. It arrived precisely when the land had begun to open itself again, when growth had resumed, when defenses were down. The sky did not wait for heat or instability. It interrupted renewal. Meteorologists pointed to shifting patterns and unstable air, but explanations did little to calm the unease. Hail in mid-spring doesn't just destroy matter, it shatters belief in familiar order. The frightening thing isn't the falling ice, it's the feeling that once reliable cycles are losing their boundaries. In Scripture, hail is never gentle. It does not nourish. It interrupts. It arrives as a sign that something has crossed a line, that what was assumed to be safe is no longer protected by timing or season. It falls not to destroy everything, but to stop what was moving forward. So let me ask you something. When the sky breaks its pattern, what do you expect next? More storms? More noise? Or do you assume the danger is already over once the ice stops falling? Here's the part worth thinking about. What if the hail wasn't the event, but the signal. Because shortly after the ice cleared, the ground didn't crack or shake, it simply opened. Sinkholes appeared where they were never supposed to form, in places marked safe, solid, and finished. The first sinkhole did not open in a place known for collapse. It appeared in new pavement, reinforced foundations, an area engineers had marked as stable. There had been no heavy rain, no flooding, no warning signs. One moment the surface was whole, the next, it was gone. What followed made the event harder to ignore. A second sinkhole opened days later. Then another. Not scattered. Not random. They formed a straight line beneath the surface, stretching quietly across streets, lots, and open land, as if tracing a path no map had ever recorded. Before officials closed the area, before barriers were set, animals reacted. Dogs refused to walk near the openings, pulling back on leashes and freezing in place. Birds avoided the ground nearby, lifting off suddenly and not returning. Even wildlife, normally indifferent to human spaces, altered their routes, circling wide around the disturbed ground. They did not approach out of curiosity. They kept distance, as if the land itself had become untrustworthy. What unsettled residents most was the silence. There were no tremors, no cracking sounds, no visible movement before each collapse. The ground did not shake, it withdrew. And after each opening, it stopped. No spreading damage, no chain reaction, as though whatever caused it had done exactly what it came to do. Experts searched for explanations beneath the surface, but the pattern remained. Stable ground failed, the failures aligned, and living creatures sensed it before instruments did. The holes did not announce disaster. They marked something else, a line drawn quietly beneath familiar places. If the earth can open where it is not supposed to, and life instinctively knows to stay away before we do, then the question is no longer about geology. It is about warning, and whether we are still paying attention to the ground beneath our feet before it decides to pull back again. While storms strike cities and silence spreads across wildlife, something else begins to happen quietly, beneath the surface. In the American Southwest, a region long known for ancient ruins and buried history, the ground gave way to a small but troubling discovery. During routine work in a dry desert basin, a weathered wooden container was exposed just beneath hardened soil. It wasn't uncovered by a flood or a collapse. The earth simply opened enough to reveal it. Inside were beads shaped by hand, thin pieces of corroded metal, and scraps of fabric worn down by time. What stood out was not their age, but their order. The items were placed carefully. Nothing was scattered, nothing crushed. This was not debris, left behind by erosion. It looked intentional. It looked. In places like this, artifacts are not unusual. Arrowheads, tools, fragments of pottery surface every year. But this felt different. Objects lost to time are usually broken, displaced, mixed with stone and dust. This was arranged. Hidden. Not forgotten. What unsettled researchers was how untouched it seemed. The desert destroys carelessly. Heat cracks wood. Soil shifts and collapses. Yet this container held its shape, as if it had been set aside with purpose, meant to remain unseen until a later moment. Scripture often describes the earth as more than ground beneath our feet. It speaks of land that remembers, of stones that witness, of things sealed away until an appointed time. The book of Daniel speaks of knowledge being closed and hidden until the time of the end. No one claims this object holds sacred power, but its timing invites pause. As the modern world grows more unstable, violent weather, frozen regions, systems breaking down what lies beneath the surface is beginning to appear, not through destruction, but through exposure. Above ground, force and chaos. Below ground, patience and order. As if the earth has been waiting. This may be nothing more than a personal item from a forgotten culture, placed there generations ago. History is filled with such traces. Yet when the present feels fragile, the past returning feels symbolic. When the surface can no longer hold, what was buried begins to speak. And the question does not go away. Are these things rising because humanity is learning more, or because time itself no longer allows them to stay hidden? If the ground is starting to release what it once kept sealed, it leaves one uneasy thought behind. What else is still beneath us, waiting for its moment? Before we continue, please like and subscribe to support the channel. Every bit helps. Thank you. As the Earth releases what it once kept hidden, attention shifts upward to a place that cannot be touched, yet refuses to be ignored. While objects surface quietly from the ground, the sky over the central United States begins to behave in ways that feel just as unsettling. On the open plains of the Midwest, people in a wide grassland preserve looked up to see something form overhead. A broad, circular ring of dark clouds appeared, hovering high above. It began to rotate slowly, even though the sky around it remained calm and clear. What made it stand out was not its size, but its control. The clouds were clearly moving, yet there was no wind at ground level. No rain, no thunder. Tall grass stood still. Birds continued flying. And yet the sky above them was turning. The formation held its shape. It didn't spread outward. It didn't collapse inward. At its center was a darker core, surrounded by lighter clouds, circling it in a steady loop. Motion existed only where the clouds were nowhere else. The contrast was disturbing. The sky felt active, while the land beneath felt frozen in place. There was no sense of immediate danger, but there was no comfort either. This wasn't how storms normally behave. It looked less like chaos and more like a system following rules people could not see. Unlike a tornado or a funnel cloud, nothing dropped toward the ground. The ring didn't widen. It didn't tear apart. It simply rotated slow, measured, contained, before gradually thinning and fading away. Because nothing was damaged, it was easy to explain away, but those who watched didn't leave. They stood still, eyes fixed upward, unsure of what they were witnessing. Weather science can describe rotating cloud patterns, shifts in air layers, temperature contrasts, local circulation. These explanations exist, and they matter. Yet standing beneath that sky, the absence of force made the moment feel wrong. Movement without pressure, rotation without violence, change without warning. Scripture often speaks of the sky not as a backdrop, but as a sign that causes people to pause. In the Gospel of Luke, signs in the heavens are mentioned alongside unrest on the earth, not as final declarations, but as moments meant to wake attention. The sky does not explain itself. It signals. First, the ground gives up what it hid. Then the sky begins to move quietly. One does not explain the other. But together, they form a pattern that feels hard to ignore. If the earth beneath our feet and the sky above our heads are both acting differently, the question becomes unavoidable. Are these simply rare natural events, or are they reminders that what we call stable may no longer be so? When the sky moves without warning, it does not shout. It waits for someone to look up. You saw what happened in the sky. The light didn't flash. It didn't drift. It stood there, fixed, silent, deliberate. And maybe you're already asking the same question many others asked that night. Was it a sign, or just something we don't understand yet? But here's the part most people miss. When something changes above us, we tend to look up and wait for answers to come from the sky. We expect thunder. We expect fire. We expect noise. What we don't expect is for the response to come from below. So let me ask you this. While everyone was watching the heavens, did you notice what was happening underfoot? Because almost at the same time that light appeared above, water began to rise where it shouldn't have, not from rivers, not from storms, from the ground itself, quietly, without warning. And that's why this matters. If the sky can open without a sound, what makes us think the earth would announce itself any differently? Stay with me because the next event didn't fall from above. It surfaced. The flooding did not arrive the way people expected. There was no river breaking its banks, no wall of water rushing in from upstream. Instead, water began to rise from below. Storm drains overflowed. Basement floors grew slick. Water seeped through cracks in concrete and poured up through places meant to stay dry. Streets filled last. The ground filled first. What confused residents most was the water itself. It was clear, not brown, not thick with mud or debris. Streetlights reflected cleanly across its surface, giving it an unnatural shine. There was no smell of sewage, no sign of contamination. It did not look like floodwater. It looked misplaced. Then, almost as suddenly as it appeared, it began to withdraw. Within hours, sometimes less, the water receded back into the ground it had come from. It left behind no heavy silt, no ruined landscape, only damp walls, soaked foundations, and unanswered questions. The flood did not linger long enough to be studied. It came, released pressure, and disappeared. Emergency crews searched for broken mains and hidden pipelines, but found no clear source. Rainfall records did not match the volume of water. Rivers nearby remained within normal levels. There was no single point of failure to blame. The event behaved less like a flood and more like the land itself had briefly opened and then closed again. In Scripture, water is never merely a background force. It reveals, it divides, it responds. Here, it did not fall from the sky or rush in from afar. It rose quietly, cleared itself, and withdrew, leaving behind the uneasy sense that something beneath the surface had shifted, spoken, and then gone silent. The streets dried. Life resumed. But the question did not fade as quickly as the water. If floods can rise without rivers, appear without warning, and vanish without trace, then what else beneath our feet might be capable of the same sudden release? Did God stop the flood in the Bible? Well, though not thoroughly mentioned, God had to be used by government in order that the flood subside to mountain altitude. The mountains are God's children, and they gave height limits to the flood legally. To stop the local universe from being overtaken by flood, God, a macro giant, had to be given of the flood to drink. Microscopic salt formations called gargoyles were introduced to his bowels by drinking. Interrogating God while he be sedated, the other Elohim spoke that he could dream. Dreaming well, God manifested as man within his thoughtful visions. He approached the gargoyle within his dream. Being that God is really a macroscopic cloud giant, the humongous gargoyle cloud giant sent electric current into God's sleeping body. From sizes unknown, the radiation began. Within his dream, the gargoyle was unable to send within his dream body. The current went first up in reflective expansion. Around God's dream body was a perfect see-through water gargoyle. The water being expanded and halted the local flood. Like an umbrella sheds water from the clouds above, the cosmic catastrophe was diverted by clear water replication. The replica gargoyle continued to expand and push the cosmic flood out. Once the electricity pushed the tributary of water out of God's sleeping body, the positive lightning shot up to form vegetation. Trees covered the earth by upward surge. The chlorophyll from the gargoyle salt filled heaven from a small dream cloud. God's dream led him to the infinite universe. Color arrived in heaven. In an instant. The foliage was colorful, and all became biologically electroplated. Second heaven is the pool and puddle that fully ends the macro expansion of the Bible flood. Basin and bad sin are comparisons in the event. Freezing a node somewhere was the cosmic government. Like a plug for a leak, the flood ended. Lightning does a lot in nature, with some crime-fighting weather fixes to help. The standing surge, Jesus used to walk on. A fugitive of hellish worlds teleported to earth in search of freedom. The giant cloud with fractal being compressed under ground salt as it arrived. Volcanoes formed from the weight on the salt sodium. Holograms were magnified above the underground volcanoes. The people that came out holographically ahead of animals were densified and downsized for local residency. A little leak still gets in from that following God unto his dream. Pumps keep that down, using radio sequences and stealth. A cube of submarine vessels of 2 layers was the first universal state. The waters were below it and drenched the cube. Emotional catastrophe filled the earth people that were mentally children then. God told the armies to submerge the cube in order to subdue the cosmic river. When it occurred is unknown. The fields and motors used resonating power to put unneeded water from submersion. Eventually, the water was pushed outside of the local space vacuum, except for a flow through river of normal Earth capability. A whale helps the river flow through now, however the cube was still on control. The submarines are scattered in the Earth and around it in modern time. The technology actually engages cosmic radiation at a vibrational level. The field presence in the air mostly is able by deafening reflection to form magnetic functions that match the scattered cube mechanical vibrations. Matching them gives the functions over to clouds. The submarines get powered inversely by space radiation unknown. The clouds just keep allowing the motor functions to keep the water away. Deafness is displaced with also separately in cloud sections. Blindness. The light from all of the big noise is focused into submission at a water lens macro level. The Earth is used as a muffler of sound in the technological algorithm. Blocking and controlling the fountains produced by the whale are 2 walls of submarines. Some of them are stolen. One is. The worlds of Earth that were indeed flooded by the missing one would be small. Most of the leaking from the missing sub could be controlled. The smallest world would be left to their technology. A pinhole colony of people are the flooded ones. Electrical transformers would displace a cloud just like the subs and cause cosmic cloud. The function is being carried out by that little cloud universe. Right next to the transformer it is there, using cosmic radiation to remain hidden. God spoke sound at the location. The slightest cosmic vibration won't come into the universe's cloud now. God said it. People would have to work in here in now times. Submarines would need fuel in here now. The thief ditched the sub, calling it the Philadelphia experiment. God called on one that walks water of specific tone. There, that sent the radio signal to the cube for flood stop. From the point at which the Ice Age ended, there would be floods of extremely large proportions worldwide. Oddly enough, many world cultures report floods in the deep past. Imagine that. That being said, flood stories are woven into the myths, legends of many world cultures and traditions. What is written in the Torah, Talmud, the source of that which is in the collection of books called the Bible, is not the only one, and is not original. The area between the Tigris and Euphrates river systems would flood, but as well, so does the Nile, regularly. It's been theorized that the actual story of the Great Flood was either directly plagiarized from Mesopotamia, as the Semitic peoples that eventually made up the Hebrews extensively traveled, traded, interacted socially and philosophically with societies in Mesopotamia, or that it relates to stories older than the Epic of Gilgamesh that either have been lost or we just haven't found yet. The flood itself could be related to flooding in the Tigris and Euphrates area, or could actually be related to the flooding of the Black Sea, as in the link above. Sacred texts, or religious literature, is never a solid nor dependable historical reference, and it's been shown time and again that if it is thought to be so, there ends up being little, if any, archaeological evidence to support. What does the Great Flood represent? To my mind, the flood is another excellent example of the meta-narrative of Genesis. As I mention in David Moore's answer to "What are the reasons why the book of Genesis in the Bible was the most misunderstood portion of the Bible?" The creation stories are myths of the best kind, explanations for why things are the way they are, which appeal partly to the empirical and partly to the ideal and the metaphysical. All our knowledge consists of such conflations. My favorite examples are found in the sciences with which I am somewhat familiar. We endow matter and energy with a mind. We can hardly avoid it. Various systems interact in a manner that takes on intentionality. Remember, in what way is any cell trying to survive? In what way does a protein have a purpose? In a godless world, there is no reason for life to be any different from non-life. All is equal in stochastic thermodynamics. So, why is it that we see sense in concepts such as pathology and physiology? What, again, distinguishes them? Does pathos exist? Really? Do tissues feel terror? Do cells suffer? If not, then we do not. Human consciousness is the meta-narrative to the world of physical consequence, and this is the sort of logical space that Genesis occupies. It gives reasons for the way things are. Those reasons are simplifications designed to convey certain aspects of significance at the expense of others. That's reality, really. So, why a flood? Why the death? Why the destruction? Firstly, I believe an actual deluge occurred. I am unsure of the scale. Australia is on fire right now. That statement is both true and false. Whole areas are untouched. Similarly, an ancient set of authors knew a smaller world, and it is conceivable to me that the entire Mediterranean rim beneath the Black Sea may have been affected. Many survivors of events on a global scale describe such scenarios as the end of the world. This is because our world is the area we have associations with. No one has ever seen the whole. However, here we are talking about a machine language level problem. What matters is the significance the occurrence takes on to the people that the story becomes part of. Like family legacies, Genesis is a work that establishes identity, both a tribal one and a more general type. When we consider the intentionality expressed in the flood myth, we are faced with a discomforting premise: a God that desires the destruction of his creation. The creation has become corrupted. How? Why? Let's look at the justification for the flood. Here it is. The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled. So, the Lord said, "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." Genesis 6:5-7. NIV. Ah, the regret of God. Disproof of omniscience, right? Only in the sense that the freedom allowed to the world allows its divergence from his image. One might say we control our own bodies, but if this is the case, then why does malignancy occur? The truth is not so simple, and this is an example of simplification that makes the mind of God relatable, in exactly the sort of false way that these words represent my mentality to you. We cannot be each other. We can only imagine what it might be like in our own terms. So, in Genesis 6 we see a rejection of creation according to accumulated error, and a literal turnover of the earth by a liquid that both eliminates life and engenders it. Some might consider such a metaphorical view inflammatory for other reasons, but that is my point. Just like words take on different meanings and functions in context, so too do events and their analyses serve different ends in different times. I believe a flood occurred. I believe God is responsible. I believe the Bible communicates aspects of that instance as information that is effective. However, I also believe that my perspective of such processes approximates, by analogy, a cell's as it interprets cytokines. Furthermore, just as a fractal presents self-similarity at different scales, so some of the patterns implicit in the divine purpose can be perceived even in our own imperfect and perpetually inflamed persons. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and keep an eye out for our next video. Leave a comment, and let us know what you think. What is happening to America when none of this is happening alone?
It's another frigid day for millions as we brace for another snowstorm here on the East Coast.
Cars nearby are encased in ice after a pipe reportedly burst.
The CHP tells us it was all caused by a familiar danger for anyone who's made that drive north through the Central Valley. Dense fog made for very low visibility.
Winter no longer brings silence. It brings thick fog across California, reducing highway visibility to near zero and triggering consequences that follow as a matter of course. And it seemed to mark the moment when everything that had felt normal suddenly no longer did. Rivers surged past their limits without warning. Solid ground caved in, swallowing roads and homes as if they were never there. And above it all, the sky shifted. Unnatural sounds, deep trumpet-like roll through the air, stopping people cold. What was happening was easy to see, but far harder for anyone to truly understand why. The Bible speaks to this kind of moment. There are times described when people see, yet do not fully perceive, when events unfold plainly before them, but understanding lags behind experience. The question now is not what everyone noticed, but why now? Why didn't it raise concern at first? If you're trying to understand what's unfolding, like and subscribe before we break down each event in detail. Across parts of California, a different kind of unease spread quietly this winter. It didn't arrive with sirens or storms. Instead, a video spreading rapidly overnight showed California's Central Valley nearly disappearing beneath a dense winter fog. On Highway 99, familiar stretches of road faded from view in minutes. Headlights dissolved into glare. Taillights vanished without warning. What drivers relied on for distance and direction simply ceased to exist. It left many people uneasy when they realized how suddenly normal movement had stopped. Highway 99 is one of California's most critical transportation corridors, carrying commuters, freight, and emergency vehicles every single day. When the fog settled in, traffic slowed to a crawl almost instantly. In some areas, it stopped altogether. By early morning, the region was wrapped in a heavy, silent whiteout. Visibility dropped to near zero, for miles at a time. Drivers were forced to abandon vehicles along shoulders. Emergency responders moved cautiously, guided more by sound than sight. Pileups were reported as cars entered the fog, unaware of what lay ahead. Hundreds of vehicles became trapped in place. Road travel was severely disrupted, and reports confirmed serious accidents caused by the sudden loss of visibility. Dozens of cars and trucks were involved in the accident, forcing Freeway 99 closed and causing major traffic disruption. These were not just delays or inconveniences. Lives were affected. Families waited for news. Anxiety spread through communities that depend on this highway every day. Weather experts described the event as a classic winter fog episode, intensified by cold air trapped beneath warmer layers above. They noted that changing climate patterns are increasing the frequency and severity of these conditions, overwhelming road systems designed for clearer winters. Yet, as footage showed long stretches of highway swallowed by whiteness, many were reminded of ancient warnings found in Scripture. In the book of Isaiah, there is a description of a people moving forward while unable to see their path. We grope along the wall like the blind. We stumble at noon, as if it were twilight. The image is not about nightfall, but about daylight without clarity, motion without vision. Winter is meant to bring stillness and definition, yet here it brought blindness instead. The prophets often describe such moments not as punishment, but as testing times, when familiar ways disappear, forcing people to slow down and question direction rather than rush ahead out of habit. As fog continued to cling to the highway and daylight failed to clear it, one question lingered beneath the surface. Is this an isolated incident, or the beginning of something far more unsettling? Winter has not loosened its grip, and new signs continue to surface through sinkholes and landslides. In several areas that appeared calm and untouched by the worst of the season, residents began to relax. There were no blizzards, no howling winds, no frozen highways, no scenes of chaos. Daily life seemed normal. Many believed the danger had passed. It was within that calm that disaster arrived quietly and without warning. There was no explosion, no alarm, no visible signal of threat. The ground itself, long trusted as solid, dependable, and permanent, suddenly collapsed beneath them. In moments, familiar streets vanished. Houses were pulled downward. Cars slipped into darkness, as if they had never existed. Massive sinkholes opened without notice, carving deep scars into the earth. Beneath them was a vast emptiness, dark, unstable, and impossible to fully comprehend. People gathered at a distance, stunned into silence, trying to grasp that only minutes earlier the same place had been a home, a road, a path to safety. What made these events so disturbing was not only the destruction, but the total absence of warning. Unlike storms or earthquakes, which often give signs, sinkholes strike suddenly and without mercy. They stand as a stark reminder that humanity does not truly control the ground beneath its feet. At the same time, coastal regions have experienced landslides with increasing force. Cliffs, slowly worn by the ocean for decades, suddenly gave way. Large sections of land dropped into the sea, carrying trees, buildings, and history with them. Specialists point to heavy rain, shifting climate patterns, and weakened rock layers below the surface. From a scientific perspective, these explanations are reasonable. Yet for many people of faith, a deeper question remains. Why are these events happening so often, so abruptly, and so close together in time? Scripture has long warned that in the final days, even what seems secure will be shaken. Isaiah 24 speaks of the foundations of the earth being disturbed. Psalm 18 describes the earth quaking and the mountains trembling. Today's sinkholes and landslides cause many to recall these ancient words not to incite fear, but to awaken awareness. They point to a truth often overlooked. Lasting security does not come from buildings, possessions, or human systems, but from a firm foundation in God. When the ground beneath us can disappear without warning, we are forced to examine where our confidence truly lies, whether in wealth, stability, and control, or in the Creator, who alone cannot be shaken. These events serve as a call to humility, vigilance, and spiritual readiness, not only to prepare our homes and communities, but to prepare our inner lives. For if even the earth can fail, then God alone remains a refuge. Before we continue, let us pause for a brief prayer. May God grant us clarity, wisdom, and calm hearts as we reflect on what we are witnessing. As the afternoon faded into evening, an unusual sound rolled through the air across parts of the United States. It was not sharp, not explosive, but deep, prolonged, and resonant, echoing like a low trumpet carried on the wind. The sky itself seemed to vibrate as the sound passed overhead, lingering longer than thunder and lacking any clear direction. At first, people paused, unsure how to describe what they were hearing. It did not resemble aircraft. It did not follow the rhythm of machinery. The sound rose, fell, then returned again, slow, heavy, and unmistakably present. Windows rattled faintly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones were lifted, not to record, but to check whether anyone else was hearing the same thing. Then came the reaction. Birds that had been resting on power lines and rooftops suddenly lifted into the air. Their flight was uneven and erratic, breaking formation as they scattered across the sky. They circled briefly, then disappeared, leaving the space above strangely empty. The animals seemed to respond not to sight, but to something felt rather than seen. The sound did not fade quickly. It lingered, pulsing through the atmosphere, as if moving through layers of air rather than across the ground. Some described it as coming from everywhere at once. Others said it felt closer to vibration than noise. Online, explanations began to circulate. Some pointed to military activity or distant aircraft. Others mentioned atmospheric conditions or rare acoustic effects. Yet none of these explanations fully matched the timing, depth, or persistence of what people heard. And many asked the same quiet question: why did it happen here, and why now? In moments like this, science can explain parts of what we observe, but not always the way it feels. That gap between explanation and experience is where unease grows. In Scripture, sound carried through the air is often described as a signal rather than an accident. Trumpet-like sounds are not portrayed as background noise, but as calls to attention moments meant to interrupt routine and awaken awareness. The meaning is not fear, but recognition. Ezekiel continues that thought. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. When the sound finally faded, it left behind more than silence. It left a sense that something had passed through, unseen, unfixed, and unanswered. And the question that lingered was not whether the sound could be explained, but whether it was meant to be noticed at all. As the sky began to shift, people lifted their eyes in fear. Attention slowly shifted northward, toward waters long considered distant and untouched. What followed was quieter than floods or collapsing ground, but no less unsettling. Along remote stretches of Alaska's coastline, dark, oil-like material began appearing on icy shores, thick, tarry, unmistakably black against snow and frozen rock. There were no tankers in distress, no drilling platforms nearby, no industrial accidents reported. Authorities confirmed there were no modern oil spills to explain what was surfacing. At first, the material appeared in small patches, scattered and easily overlooked. But as reports increased, the pattern became harder to ignore. The substance was not spreading from a single source. It was emerging at multiple points along the coast, as if pushed upward rather than spilled outward. Scientists examining the phenomenon emphasized one critical detail. This was not new material. It had not been recently produced or released by human activity. Instead, evidence pointed downward. Beneath Alaska's coastal waters lie vast layers of ancient organic matter, buried deep beneath sediment, rock, and frozen ground. Some of these deposits date back thousands of years, sealed under pressure since long before modern history. Researchers believe shifts beneath the seafloor caused by changing pressure, thawing permafrost, and subtle ground movement have fractured those ancient layers. What had remained locked away for centuries was now being forced to the surface. This was not creation, it was exposure. What made the discovery especially troubling was its timing. It did not arrive in isolation. It followed reports of ground instability, collapsing foundations, and changing conditions elsewhere. The land was not simply reacting at the surface. It appeared to be releasing what it had long contained. For many observers, the question was not whether the substance posed immediate danger, but what it represented. Ancient, sealed matter does not surface without cause. Pressure builds quietly over time. Release comes only when restraint fails. Scripture often describes such moments not as accidents, but as unveilings. In the book of Job, it is written, "He uncovers the deeps out of darkness and brings deep darkness to light." The emphasis is not on destruction, but revelation. What was hidden does not remain hidden forever. The appearance of oil-like residue along Alaska's frozen coast has led many to ask a deeper question. one that science alone does not answer. Why now? Why are substances buried, since ancient times emerging at this moment, alongside so many other signs of instability? When the Earth begins to give up what it has long held, it forces a reckoning, not only with the land beneath our feet, but with the assumption that what is sealed will always remain so. The concern is not only what has surfaced, but what else may still be waiting below. For the moment, restraint finally gives way. As attention remained fixed on what was rising along distant coastlines, another discovery was unfolding quietly beneath Florida, hidden not by water or ice, but by the ground itself. For decades, maps and surveys suggested that the underground cave systems beneath the state were limited, fragmented, and well understood. That assumption is now collapsing. Beneath neighborhoods, roads, and protected land, vast empty chambers have been discovered, spaces far larger and deeper than anything previously recorded. What makes these caverns unsettling is not only their size, but how long they remained unseen. They were not uncovered by advanced scanning. They were not revealed by exploration or drilling. They came to light only when the ground above them could no longer hold. In several areas, the surface failed without warning. Streets cracked, land sank, and as it did, openings appeared, exposing hollow worlds beneath. These chambers were not newly formed. Geological analysis confirms they have existed for thousands of years, slowly carved by water moving through limestone, sealed beneath layers of earth, while life continued above, unaware. This was not a discovery made by human effort. It was exposure forced by collapse. What lies beneath Florida has always been there, quietly bearing weight, supporting cities, highways, and generations of development. Over time, erosion and shifting pressure weakened the ceilings of these hidden spaces. When balance finally gave way, the underground was revealed not because it was sought, but because concealment failed.